Hi everyone. This is Sai from Let's Upgrade. So let's talk about how to get your certificate. It's very simple. You will see two links in the description. Number one is the place where you have to go and mark your attendance. Marking your attendance tells us, like, okay, you are a legit student who have attended this particular session. Link number two is your assignment. This is where your 90% of the priority is. You have to go and submit the assignment that is given to you in this particular session. Once you're done submitting that assignment, we will be evaluating that. We will send you an email. If you get the passing criteria, then only we will give you the certificate on a particular date that is mentioned again in the description. Please check these three things, and this is the way how you will get a certificate from Let's Upgrade. Number one, mark your attendance. Number two, just go ahead and upload your assignment. Check for the email that you have received it, yes or no. What is the feedback that you have received from your trainer? Number three, check on which date the certificates will be released. Thank you. Bye. All the best. Happy learning.
Hey everybody, welcome to this interesting workshop on building an AI-powered code explainer. So as the subject line itself suggests, this is basically a tool which will consume a piece of code, that piece of code which you want to understand, which you have not understood, which you find complex to understand, and then this tool will display a line by line explanation of that piece of code, right? So why are we making such a tool? It's pretty easy to understand, right? We've all been there, right? You join an organization as a developer, and then you open a file, you stare at a wall of complex spaghetti kind of code written by someone who left the company like 3 years ago, and then you think that what on earth is this going on, right? So today we're just going to complain about it. In the next hour, we're going to build the solution, right? We'll combine the raw intelligence of Google's Gemini with the speed of Streamlit API to build a tool that reads code and explains it to you in plain English. So by the end of the session, you won't just have a new app, you'll have a superpower, right? So with this, let's get started with the next sections. Now let's have a look at the contents that we're going to cover. So the first thing is we have got just introduced to the tool and got the overview of what the tool is going to be. So this is the way it's going to look like. It's going to have a user interface that looks like this, which is going to have a section at the left hand side where you're basically going to be giving the code as the input, and then at the right hand side you see it's going to be the explanation of the line by line breakdown of the code. So if you could just expand this a little bit, what you could see is you have your def hello world and print hello streamlit as a function, and then that's a Python function, and then it's hello world as the function that you're calling, and then here is the explanation, right? It still tells you what's the summary of the basically code. That is, it basically defines a simple function named hello world that when executed prints the string hello streamlit to the console. So it explains you what the code is basically doing, and then there's a line by line breakdown as well of every single line there, right? And then there are key concepts explained as well. So like this is how useful it's going to be. So going back to the contents, this is about the overview, and then we discuss then the software and requirements in the next section, like to run this tool or to build this tool, what kind of software do you require at your disposal. And then we're going to have a small overview of the different kind of Gemini models, because since we're going to use the Google Gemini API, it's important to know like what kind of models has Gemini to offer, so that we can make pretty good use of them at different situations. And then the next line, I mean, the next sections here in dark Prussian blue, they basically demonstrate the coding components, right? So they have been enclosed in this dotted rectangle here. So the first one is coding the Gemini components, where we basically define the code structure, where we use Google Gemini as the reference large language model, and then we code the Gemini prompt function. Like this is basically that place where we are prompting the Gemini API to basically give us the response that we want. So that's developing the prompt. So these two are like kind of related sections, which relate to the Gemini API, and then you have to code the Streamlit UI components, right? So the user interface, basically, which is in Streamlit, has to be coded separately. So that's the third section. So enclosed in this dotted box are the coding sections, and then post this, we have the last section that is playing around with the tool, where we later learn to use this tool to our disposal, to our advantage, where we send some sample piece of code into this tool and then ask this tool to explain that piece of code to us, right? So we have a practical demonstration of the tool at the end. So post all these sections are over. I mean, the major section is this coding sections. Post all of that is over, we later on play with the tool. So with this introduction and the content discussion, now let's go ahead and discuss the software and requirements, right? So here we go. So here's the thing. To work on this tool or to build this tool, you require to have a version of Python installed on your machine, which is greater than 3.10, right? So 3.10 or higher. That's the Python version that you require on your machine. Because these two libraries, that is Google Generative AI, which is the Gemini API, which you're going to use, and then Streamlit, they most probably work on a version of Python that is higher than 3.10. So make sure you have 3.10 installed on your machine or higher. That's a safe bet. And then Google Generative AI is the library that you would have installed using pip install on your machine, because you can work with the Gemini API. And then Streamlit is another library that you would download and install using pip install Streamlit, because since we're using a Streamlit user interface, we require Streamlit at our disposal. So these are basically the software and requirements, so with which you're going to be ready and prepared before we embark on this journey of building this tool, right? So that's about the software and requirement. Now, the next section, which is this section, is basically meant to give you an overview of the different Gemini models, right? So Google Gemini has many models to offer, but then the ones that are commonly used while building these kinds of that basically use like agentic AI or like say an LLM parser or something like that. These kinds of tools that we're building right now, they typically use these three commonly used models. Like the first one is the Gemini 2.5 Pro. This is basically the flagship reasoning model of this generation, which released in like say mid. That's best suited for complex coding, nuanced instruction following, and a heavy multimodal tasks. So multimodal here means like the mode of input is going to be like an image or maybe a video or say text, structured text, unstructured text, or maybe voice or something like that. So that's basically multimodal. So for all of these inputs, it works really well. That's the flagship model. And then the second one is the Gemini 2.5 Flash. So this is like more of a high efficiency workhorse optimized for speed and high volume processing, offering a balance of performance and a cost for enterprise scale applications. This is like in between the 2.5 Pro and the 2.5 Flashlight. That's more of a balanced offering by Gemini. And then the last one is Gemini 2.5 Flashlight. So that's a specialized lightweight model built for extreme low latency and cost efficiency, designed specifically for simple high frequency tasks like classification and translation. So typically when you work on say RAG kind of applications, retrieval augmented generation, that use that technology, you require models that have really low latency, and then 2.5 Flashlight basically offers you that, right? That's a low latency model and cost efficiency as well, right? So that gives you quick summarization and quick results at our disposal. So like these are the three basic models, and then we also discussed their high level utility, right? And then just to quickly compare these three. So 2.5 Pro 2.5 Pro is basically used for complex reasoning and coding, and its primary focus is intelligence, right? It's a highly intelligent model. As opposed to that, the 2.5 Flash is basically used for high volume summarization. So when you want to summarize tasks, like you want to summarize, like say, a 20 pages book into a one page a 20 pages report into a one page report, then in that case, you're going to use the 2.5 Flash. And the primary focus of the 2.5 Flash is the speed or cost balance, right? So the balance of speed as well as cost. And the 2.5 Flash Lite, the last one, the third one, is on the next end of the spectrum, where that basically focuses on simple micro tasks like, say, tagging or something like that. And the focus of that model is the lowest latency and cost. So where you require low latency and low cost, that's where you use the 2.5 Flash Lite. right? Recently, in November 2025, Gemini also released the Gemini 3 models, which have not been mentioned here because they're the advanced version. So, yes, as they are used in production, we'll discuss on them as well. But as of now, these three are the most primarily used models, and I hope this information is useful for us to get started. Most probably in our solution, we are going to use the Flash or the Flashlight or the Pro itself, right? One of these three. So, with this, let's go to the next section on actually. All right, so now let's start coding the actual application. So as usual, we go to projects to create a new project. So let's say new project. Then we go to the directory where we want to paste the path right here. So we say select path and then folder, and then we give a name for this project called as code explainer, right? So we say create. That creates a new project for us. So now we save this file in the same directory and with the same name, say code explain. So now let's import the lab thing is Streamlit and st, then import. So we imported these three, and now let's go with the Gemini components, right? So for Google Gemini, let's say config Gemini. So what this is going to do is by consuming the API key, it's going to basically try to connect to the application. So we do. So let's write a command here. It's like configures the Gemini API with the provided key, right? So with the provided API key. So now we go down and then let's say try and have an except block, right? So try the GenAI dot configure, right? So this line is basically going to connect to the Gemini API, right? So API key is API key and then return true. And then if for some reason the API key is incorrect or the API key has not been provided by the user, right, then it should populate an error. It's a Streamlit error that says error configuring API, right? So that's most of it. Then return false. So what this thing is going to do is it's going to be basically consuming the API key and then configuring it for us. But then if there's no API key or if the API key is incorrect, then it's going to populate an error message, right? So that's what this thing is going to do. So that's it about the Gemini components. Now, in the next section, what we're going to do is we're going to be. So here we go. In this section, we are basically going to code the Gemini prompt function. So what do you mean by the Gemini prompt function? So that function which encloses the prompt which we're going to send to Google Gemini, that function has various other components as well, components before and after the prompt. So we are going to code those components in this function, right? So let's define the function here and say, let's call it get explanation. So def get explanation, say code snippet language, right? So this is actually the core function of the tool, right? This function is the heart of the tool, where the first argument is the piece of code that you feed through the user interface, and then language is basically the explanation, right? Language is basically the programming language, whether this belongs to Python or that belongs to VBA or belongs to anything else, right? So that's it. Uh, so let's define this here. Say sends the code to Gemini API to Gemini and gets a line by line explanation, right? Right. So let's define the model first. Model equals GenAI dot generative models or model. So this generative model is a method embedded within the GenAI class, this class that basically houses all the different kinds of models, right? So the one that we're going to use is Gemini 2.5 Flash, right? This is the one that we discussed in the earlier section with the list of available Gemini models. So this is the one that we're going to use, and as we know, this to be a version of the Gemini model, which is in between the Pro and then the Flashlight, right? So it's a balance of intelligence versus cost, right? So let's add a comment here. So using the highly capable Gemini 2.5 Flash for speed and accuracy, right? Next, what we do is we're going to craft the prompt now. Now we're going to write the actual prompt. There is a main piece of code that goes into the Gemini large language model. So crafted prompt to ensure structure output, right? So equal, then let us embed that in three double quotes like this. Say you are an expert programming instructor. So we give the large language model a persona, right? So the persona is making it an expert programming instructor. The following, now we pass the, so if this is going to be like say Python, then this is going to be Python, right? If this is going to be Visual Basic, or this is going to be Visual Basic, right? Like just as an example. So following language code snippet clearly and concisely, right? So that it learns from the structure to produce the output exactly in the way that we want, right? So we say structure your response. We say summary 1 to 2 tense high level overview of what the code does. All right. Number 2, line by line breakdown. Code explain each is doing points, right? And lastly, concepts, programming concepts use example loops, recursion, list, comprehensions. All right. So these three are the asks from the prompt, right? The first one is to provide a high level overview of what the code is doing. Obviously, that's what we want out of the tool. And then a line by line breakdown. So going through the code and explaining what each line is doing, right? So as opposed to a summary of what the code is doing, this is going to give you a line by line breakdown of what each line is doing. And then you use bullet points, right? Break down in a bullet point format. And then key concepts, like briefly list the main programming concepts used, like loops, recursion, and list comprehension. So this also delves deeper into the key programming concepts, right? So next thing is the code snippet. So this code snippet is basically the argument which comes from this function, right? So this argument is basically being given as a context to uh, the large language model from this place, right? Let's say with Streamlit dot. So while this code is being analyzed, right, there's going to be a pop-up that tells you that the code is being analyzed. That's exactly what we are handling at the moment. We are defining at the moment. So response, this is the main block. So response equals model dot generate content, the prompt return response dot text, right? Right? Except f error generating explanation e, right? So this does it for us. So essentially, what we've done here is we have created a function. All right, so now let's code the Streamlit components, right? The components that constitute the user interface. So the first thing we can do is set the page configuration. So let's do that. Let's say page configuration. Then let's say Streamlit set page config page title code, something this kind of a symbol, and then layout equals white, right? And let's try to encompass all the other components in the main function itself. So let's say def main. So sidebar for settings with, this is one of the settings sidebar where the first thing we try to code is basically the API key, right? So ideally you're supposed to save the API key as an environment variable, but then if that's not happening, right? Somehow if you're not able to do that, then you have another chance to code that. It's to mention that through the user interface itself. So that's the component which I'm coding right now. So, so as I just mentioned, right, so we try to load the API key first. So we say default key equals os dot get environment, then Google API key. So this is basically the name of the environment variable in the system where the API key is stored. You also got to create the API key using a similar name. Otherwise, whatever name you create for the variable, right, pass that variable name right here, right? So next is key equals text input, right? So here enter the Google Gemini API key equals default, then type password. So when you say type equals password, then what it's going to do is it's going to be encrypting the characters in the asterisk format, right? Just like the password is encrypted, because a key is supposed to be a private uh, value which you're not supposed to expose to the outside world, right? So that's the reason why we are encrypting this in the password format. So and then say help double TPS, right? So this is where you basically get the key from, right? So that's how we have coded the settings portion, and now we go to coding the actual components of the UI, right? The actual functional components of the UI. So we say string dot markdown streamlit dot markdown with streamlit dot input output, and so we are writing this content in the markdown. So that's what we do, right, as a markdown. And then the next portion is the main content area, right? And the title, yeah, explainer, markdown. Paste a snippet of code below. So this is going to be the content within the text box in the user interface where we enter the explain, right? Paste a snippet of code below and I'll explain line by line works. Now it works line by line. Column layout. Now we create two columns. Column 1, column 2 with streamlit dot subheader. Let's say input code, right? And then language, streamlit select box. So select language, right? So that we are now populating a drop down where we can have all these kinds of languages. So any language, let's say, which doesn't fall into these categories, which come into other categories. Let's say we don't have VP here, so VP script and VP.NET comes under the other category, right? So now let's go the text area, right? So let's say code input equals streamlit dot text area, right? Let's say paste your code here. Height is 400, extruder is, and then we have the analyze button, streamlit dot subheader, and if not for the API key, I mean, if the API key is absent, then warning and if there's no code input, right? So this line is basically checking if we have either the code input or the API key, right? So if either of them is not present, then it populates a warning. Else, so here we basically call the get explanation function, right? The one that we defined here on the top, right? So now we just add an optional expander just to see, just comment this line anyway because it's just to see for debugging, so it's not basically required, but still, let's try that out. Right, so now we've defined the main function. So now, if name equals main, then main basically, right? So that's that. I mean, in this way, we've coded all the components now. So we set the page configuration at the top, and then we define the main function, which we intend to call as the main piece of code, which includes the calling of the Google, getting the API key from the environment, and then calling the get explanation function, and then defining all the other components of the Streamlit user interface that include the dropdown, the text box for pasting code, and then the explanation section for explaining the code line by line, right? So now in the next section, it's time to now play around with the tool. So let's do exactly that. Let's see how this tool works in reality, right? So let's go ahead. All right, so before we move into the section of playing with the actual tool, there are some important changes we're going to make in the code. If we have a glance at the code once, right, we understand that we need to make these changes in order to enable the code to work correctly. Otherwise, we're going to get errors, right? So the first thing which comes to our attention is that this main content area has been placed inside the sidebar, which needs to be changed, right? It has to be outside the sidebar. So uh, let's do that. Let's say shift tab. That's the first correction we made. That's now correctly captured outside the sidebar, right along the sidebar. So it's the first change. The second thing we notice that within this content as well, we have uh, the code input and the analyze button again inside this language, right? So we need to bring it outside. So that's the second change. The third change is if you look at this, right, there's no comma here. So we had a comma, and then default key, right, it comes from here. But then the spelling of default has to be corrected. That's the fourth part, right? And then the fifth part is you see this code snippet has to be the variable name, right? So we it should not be this. It should be the variable name itself. Otherwise, it's not going to get the actual input here. So we replace that, and now we are good to go, right? So now we are in a good position to run the code in the next section. So let's do that. Let's now run the code from the console using Streamlit, right? All right. So here we go. We have arrived at the final piece of the workshop where we have finished the introduction, we have finished the software and requirements discussion, we have finished the overview of the Gemini models, and then the next three components where we've coded the Gemini components, the Gemini prompt function, and then the Streamlit components. And thereafter, we have arrived at the final piece where we have the green section here where we're going to play around with the tool right now. So let's do that. Let's go to the folder where we have the core explainer. Let's copy the path and let's open the Anaconda prompt. Right, so let's run the application using Streamlit. Streamlit run. Right, so it's supposed to pop up the Streamlit UI, which is now loading. I guess there's some error, so let's try to resolve that. Oh yeah, you got to call the main function, right? We forgot about that. So main. So let's say rerun, and now it's supposed to populate the user interface components. Let's give it some time. Right, so here we go. Amazing, isn't it? We have the settings portion here. So this section has been encrypted for you to enter the API key. At this moment, the API key which I have on my system, right, which is present on this system here, has been populated right here. And then in this drop down, you select the input code, whether it's going to be Python or JavaScript or Java or C++ or HTML, CSS or SQL or any other piece of code. And then you paste that code here. So for now, let's take the same Python code that we have here, right? So let's copy this. Let's say let's copy this portion. Let's say let's take the easier part first. So maybe let's take this portion, right? We say copy, paste it here. So these three import libraries, and then the configure Gemini function, and then let's say explain code. All right. So this code defines a function, right? Google Gemini will securely initialize the Google Gemini client using provided API key. It includes robust error handling, utilizing the Streamlit library to display user-friendly error messages if the API configuration fails, right? So the line-by-line breakdown is given here. So this is a summary, and that's exactly what we expected, right? Summary to be. It's basically initializing the Google Gemini APIs, which is given here, and then the line-by-line breakdown basically reveals that importing Streamlit and importing this. So every import line has been mentioned here, and which has been explained over here. It imports Streamlit library and assigns the alias st. It's used for building interactive. So it also explains what this library is basically used for. So that's the additional advantage here. It also explains like what the OS library basically is, right? And then this defines a Python function named configure Gemini. It takes one argument API key. This function's sole purpose is to set up the Gemini additive, is to set up the generative AI client, right, as mentioned here. And this initiates a try block, which is fundamental to Python's error handling. The code inside this block is going to be executed if it raises an error, and then the configure API key, the portion here. So every single line is explained in detail here, right? So when you join a new team, and then if you're not clear about somebody's piece of code, all you can do is you can basically use this tool and then paste that piece of code here, paste that block of code at the left hand side, and click on explain code, and then each line is going to be explained to you, right? Let's try another piece of code. Let's say we want to know what's this thing doing. What's this thing doing? So let's say Control C and paste this here, right? So it clearly shows you like, so there's no mention of Streamlit anywhere, but still it's able to somehow decipher the fact that this comes from a Streamlit API, right? So it's designed for a Streamlit web application, creating a settings icon. So it provides a text input attempting to pre-fill, right? So with Streamlit.sidebar, and then with header, with settings, it explains all the pieces to you, right? So in this way, I hope this tool has been really, really helpful. I hope this workshop has been enjoyable, and I really look forward to coming up with another workshop. So I wish you the very best and good luck with playing around with this tool. And I would see you in another such workshop with another such project.